Useless.
Not putting my jacket on him. As well, I'm playing Titleist 1, and Jack says, I'm playing Titleist 1. And Jack goes, yeah, I've been playing it for 32.
He's gutless might be the nicest thing you can say, because Nick Faldo just sent another top golfer straight out of bounds with his mouth. 6 majors on the shelf, decades behind the microphone, and a list of targets that reads like a who's who of the sport. Most pundits choose diplomacy. Faldo chooses destruction, and the 6 men on this list have all felt it firsthand. Here's the thing that makes all of this more than just gossip. Every feud on this list has a real history behind it. A tournament, a press conference, a moment where lines were crossed and things were said that you do not come back from. Faldo is not reckless. He is deliberate, and that is what makes this whole thing so compelling. If you are already locked in on this one, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It takes 2 seconds and it makes a real difference. Now let's get into the 6 golfers Nick Faldo truly cannot stand. And we are starting with number 6. Number 6 is Greg Norman. And if you think this is just about LIV Golf, you are not seeing the full picture. This goes so much deeper than a league. This is a rivalry that stretches back over 30 years, rooted in one of the most dramatic final rounds in the history of major championship golf. Norman walked into the final round of the 1996 Masters with a 6-stroke lead. 6 strokes! That is not a lead you casually lose. That is the kind of advantage that relaxes the whole field except for one man. Faldo was not relaxed. He was focused. He shot a final round that quietly and efficiently dismantled everything Norman had built over the first 3 days. Norman collapsed. Faldo won his 6th and final major. On the 18th green, Faldo put his arm around his beaten rival. It looked like compassion in the moment, but sport has a long memory, and the distance between the 2 men only grew with the years. Then Norman became the CEO of LIV Golf, and Faldo found his microphone. For someone who had spent years watching Norman reinvent himself as a global golf entrepreneur and disruptor, the LIV appointment must have felt like a direct provocation. In March 2023, with Norman pushing his grow the game narrative on every platform available to him, Faldo cut through it with 3 words: nobody's watching. That was his verdict on LIV's impact and relevance. No qualifications, no diplomatic cushioning, just a flat dismissal of the whole enterprise. He called the money on offer to players ridiculous cash offers and said the entire league existed for financial reasons and nothing else. He categorized the players who left the tour for LIV as simply choosing the grass is greener, and he used a retail analogy to explain his contempt. He compared LIV golfers to an employee who walks out on their store after 20 years to join a rival company, then calls the original employer back and demands a bonus for their long service. That image was designed to expose the entitlement Faldo sees at the heart of the whole LIV movement. When Norman was excluded from the 2023 Masters Champions dinner, Faldo noted the awkwardness in the room between the traditionalists and the LIV players. He did not need to elaborate. For Faldo, Norman choosing a rival league over his established legacy was the final chapter of a rivalry that Faldo has always believed he won, on the course and off it. Number 5 is Brooks Koepka, and this one is not loud. It is cold and precise, and somehow that makes it land harder. Koepka is one of the best players of his generation. 5 major championships, a record in the sport's biggest events that places him among the elite of his era. But Koepka has never performed for the media. He is blunt, occasionally dismissive, and has made it clear more than once that he finds television coverage more of an intrusion than a benefit. At some point, he said out loud what a lot of players likely think privately. He suggested that announcers should just shut up and let the golf speak for itself. Faldo heard that, and on air he responded with 2 words. Fascinating stuff, delivered flat, completely sarcastic, measured with surgical precision. Those 2 words communicated more than a full paragraph could. Faldo spent 2 decades building a second career in the broadcast booth, and he treated it with the same single-minded obsession he once applied to rebuilding his swing from scratch. He takes commentary seriously as a craft and as a profession. When Koepka dismisses that entire ecosystem as unnecessary noise, Faldo does not let it go quietly. During the 2023 Masters, when Koepka was involved in scrutiny over a caddy situation and a potential rules issue, the broadcast team examined it with a level of attention that reflected the existing undercurrent between the player and the booth, more than the actual severity of the incident itself. Koepka's indifference to all of it was its own kind of statement, and for a man like Faldo, who built everything on obsessive attention to detail, that indifference reads as something close to contempt. Old guard versus new guard. Faldo believes the sport deserves your full engagement and respect. Koepka believes excellence on the course is the only thing that matters. Neither is entirely wrong, but they will never agree on it. Koepka's 5 majors demand respect, but in Faldo's framework, Results alone do not excuse open contempt for the media structure that funds the entire sport. And every time Koepka dismisses the booth, Faldo finds a way to respond. 2 words at a time. Number 4 is Phil Mickelson. And this one started with a press conference and never really ended. September 2014, Gleneagles. The United States had just lost the Ryder Cup again. Captain Tom Watson, 65 years old, 8 major titles on his record, one of the finest competitors the sport has ever produced, was sitting at the press conference table. And Phil Mickelson, seated in that same room, used his post-match time in front of the international media to publicly dismantle his captain's leadership approach. Mickelson compared Watson's traditional top-down management style unfavorably to Paul Azinger's pod system from 2008, like the last time America had lifted the cup. He framed it as urgency driven by 8 defeats in 10 matches. He said it was honest advocacy for structural change. From one angle, it looked like a player fighting for the future of his program. Faldo saw it completely differently. He accused Mickelson of throwing the captain under the bus, not just offering critique, throwing him under the bus. Faldo argued that those concerns belonged in the team room, handled in private with the respect that a figure of Watson's stature deserved. Instead, Mickelson chose the cameras, with Watson sitting only a few feet away. Faldo described it as a tough one to witness, which is about as restrained as Faldo gets. Faldo also noted that Mickelson had been benched for an entire day on Saturday, the first time in his entire Ryder Cup career, and he suggested that wounded pride, not noble concern for team reform, was the real engine behind the public speech. That interpretation is harsh, but Faldo rarely reaches for a gentler reading when a harsher one fits the facts. What stretched this feud further was what came next. Mickelson became one of the most prominent players to join LIV Golf. For Faldo, who had already made up his mind about Mickelson's character at that 2014 press conference, the move was not a surprise, it was a confirmation, a pattern revealing itself again. Number 3 is Paul Azinger. And this one is built on something that sits at the very core of Faldo's identity, because it is about a direct comparison of results. And the results did not favor Faldo. In 2008 at Valhalla, Azinger captained the United States to a dominant Ryder Cup victory. He implemented what became known as the pod system, grouping players into small units based on personality type and natural chemistry. It was a departure from the traditional captain-driven model. It was creative, and it worked convincingly. Faldo was on the other side as the European captain, and Europe lost. In the aftermath, coverage focused on Faldo's tactical failures with clear emphasis. The decision to bench the Garcia and Westwood pairing during the Saturday foursomes was identified as the defining mistake of the week. The contrast between the two captains was drawn repeatedly and without mercy. Azinger was innovative. Faldo was outdated. That verdict did not fade. Faldo took public shots at Azinger's setup after the event, characterizing the pod system's complexity as overstated and unnecessary. Azinger defended his approach and made the pointed comment that the captain does matter when building the right environment for a team to win. That remark was not neutral. It was aimed directly at Faldo's 2008 performance, and everyone in the sport understood exactly what it meant. Their tension ran deeper still because both men worked as lead analysts on competing major American networks, Faldo for CBS and NBC, Azinger for ABC and ESPN. 2 former major champions, 2 rival networks, 2 irreconcilable philosophies on what great captaincy looks like. Every broadcast season added another layer to a rivalry that had never really been settled. When Mickelson invoked Azinger's 2008 success to attack Tom Watson in that 2014 press conference, Faldo found it doubly offensive. Watson was being undermined, and Azinger was being elevated at the same time. For a man who valued both tradition and the authority of captaincy, both things happening simultaneously was its own kind of provocation. Number 2 is Colin Montgomerie. And this one plays out more quietly than the rest of the list, but the damage in it is precise. Montgomerie is one of the finest European Tour players of his era, 8 Order of Merit titles, a Ryder Cup record that places him in rare company among the greatest team competitors the sport has ever seen. He competed at the highest level for over a decade, and he won in a way that mattered deeply to generations of European golf fans. But he never won a major championship. And for Faldo, that absence is not a footnote to an impressive career. It is the defining limitation of it. Faldo's most enduring slight against Montgomerie was the suggestion that Monty was only truly exceptional in his own backyard. That phrase was a direct reference to Montgomerie's strength on the European circuit compared to his struggles in the United States, and in the majors specifically. For Faldo, who built every piece of his identity around 6 major titles won on the sport's biggest stages, a golfer without a major is simply missing the thing that matters most. Before the 2008 Ryder Cup, Faldo reportedly questioned Montgomerie's value to the European team. Given Montgomerie's Ryder Cup record, The skepticism landed badly. It caused immediate backlash across the European press. The criticism read as personal rather than tactical, and it reinforced a pattern that runs through every name on this list. Faldo applies his own demanding template to everyone, and anyone who does not match it gets told directly about the gap. Montgomerie represented European Tour excellence at its finest. Faldo represented a harder, more global, major-centric view of what true greatness in golf actually requires. Those two visions have always been in tension, and Faldo never learned how to respect what Montgomerie achieved without reaching for the one thing he never did. Number 1 is Sergio Garcia, and nothing else on this list is even in the same category. It is 2014, Gleneagles. Faldo is in the NBC broadcast booth covering the Ryder Cup as a commentator. During a segment revisiting the 2008 competition at Valhalla, the one Faldo captained and lost, he called Sergio Garcia useless. He backed it with a charge of bad attitude and said Garcia's emotional volatility had damaged the European team during that week. 6 years after the fact, on live television, with millions of viewers listening, not disappointing, not difficult, not troubled, useless. The backlash was immediate and it was unified. Graham McDowell came forward and made a point that cut straight to the problem. If Garcia was useless at Valhalla, McDowell said, part of the reason was that Faldo himself had benched Garcia and Lee Westwood during the Saturday foursomes. That tactical decision is widely considered one of the worst in Ryder Cup history. A captain who makes the critical error in a losing campaign cannot call his players useless from a broadcast booth 6 years later without someone pointing that out. McDowell pointed it out. How Rory McIlroy did something that no statement alone could match. He walked across to Garcia during the coverage, placed his arm around him publicly, and told him plainly that he was not useless. In that one gesture, McIlroy drew a clear line between the current European team and its 2008 captain. The team had moved forward. Faldo had stayed exactly where he was at Valhalla. Under significant media pressure, Faldo attempted to walk the comment back. He said on a follow-up broadcast that useless was probably the wrong word for live television, and that lousy would have been more accurate. He tried to frame the original remark as semi-jest, without malice, but the retraction only made the story bigger. The gap between useless and lousy is not really about precision. Both words point in the same direction. The underlying sentiment does not change. Faldo also hinted that he knew the real private reasons behind Garcia's difficult 2008 week, but was choosing not to share them. That suggestion of a deeper, unspoken feud was more revealing than the original insult. It told the audience this was not a careless slip in a live broadcast. It was a decision to reveal just enough and hold back the rest. Garcia's public response was brief and composed. He said he would not descend to Faldo's level. In that one sentence, Garcia came across as the more measured man in the room. The player looked dignified. The former captain looked like he was still fighting a battle that started at Valhalla and never properly finished. Now look at all 6 of these names together, and the picture that forms is not a random collection of grudges. It is a consistent set of values applied without compromise to everyone Faldo encounters in the sport. Every single conflict on this list traces back to one of 3 things: attitude and professionalism, which is the Garcia standard; loyalty to the sport's traditions and its authority figures, which explains the Watson defense and the Norman critique; and the absolute supremacy of the 4 major championships as the only real measure of a golfer's worth, which is the lens Faldo uses on Montgomerie and LIV and almost everything else in professional golf. He built his playing career entirely in isolation. Thousands of hours of practice rebuilding a swing that already won majors because he believed it could win more. He did not rely on team chemistry or personality pods or group morale sessions. He relied on mechanics and willpower and an almost ruthless ability to block out everything except what mattered. That approach produced 6 major championships. But it is a framework that works for one singular person. It does not scale easily to an entire sport built around different personalities, different timelines, and different ideas about what success looks like. The game changed around him, the players changed, the media changed, LIV arrived, and Faldo's standard remained exactly where it was in April 1996, which is precisely where all 6 of these feuds find their common origin. Is he always right? No. His 2008 captaincy had documented failures, and criticizing players from a broadcast booth for problems that began with your own strategic decisions is not a clean position. But is he honest? Almost always. And in a media environment where most analysts sand every edge and protect every relationship, Faldo's willingness to hold positions and name names out loud is something the sport genuinely needs, even when it goes further than it should. Golf is a game built on emotion, on history, on rivalries that follow people for decades, and shape how the sport tells its own story to itself and to the world. Faldo's feuds are sometimes unfair. Some of them cross lines that should have held. But they are real, and real is exactly what this sport has always needed more of. If you want more deep dives like this one, subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell us which of these feuds you think went furthest out of bounds, and if you enjoyed this, give it a like and help push it to more golf fans who need to hear these stories.
First day was cold, windy, and I three-putted the last 3 holes to shoot 75, and then we had to tee off real early in the morning and wanted to go to the press because, you know, they weren't going to like what I had to say. And so I finally go over there, and by that time I'd had 2 or 3 vodkas and 7-Ups, and I didn't really give a darn.
He won 13 times on the PGA Tour. He had a swing so pure that Jack Nicklaus himself called it one of the 4 best in the game. He won a Vardon Trophy and competed at the highest level for 2 decades. He had the kind of raw talent that should have made him a legend for all the right reasons. But Dave Hill once looked at a fellow professional on the golf course and said, "I wanted to kill him." And he was not joking, not even slightly. Golf looks polite on television. The hushed crowds, the gentle clapping, the neat handshakes on the 18th green. But underneath all of that, Dave Hill was running a one-man war against everyone around him. Players, officials, architects, course designers, the whole organization. And today we are going to name the 5 men he hated most, starting from the bottom and working all the way up to the rivalry that got genuinely ugly. If this is already feeling like it could go sideways, smash the hype button and give this video some hype right now. It only gets wilder from here. Dave Hill grew up on a 60-acre farm in Jackson, Michigan. He was one of 6 children and life was not easy. He had a severe stutter that followed him all the way through to the 8th grade. And in a small town, that kind of thing marks you. It made him an outsider from the start. It made him defensive in ways that never really went away. He described himself as a terrible loner, and that isolation hardened into something much more dangerous once he started competing seriously. He turned professional in 1958, and almost immediately he was in trouble. In 1961, the same year he won his first title at the Tucson Open, he paid approximately $1,400 in fines just for destroying equipment. At $100 per broken putter, that was nearly half of his first place check. Most men celebrate their first win with the people they love. Hill spent the money before he had a chance to enjoy it, one snapped club at a time. That set the tone for everything that followed. Hill was already showing the tour that he was going to do things his way, regardless of what it cost him financially or professionally. In 1963, after the death of his father, things got even darker. During the Frank Sinatra Open Invitational, Hill was in the middle of a prolonged putting slump, and his mental state was fragile. He walked up to PGA Tour director Joe Black on the 18th green and told him straight, if he missed his final birdie putt, he was going to break his club. Black tried to talk him down. Hill missed the putt, snapped the putter clean over his knee right there in front of everyone, then finished the hole using the broken shaft. He collected a 2-month suspension for his trouble. That was just 1963. He still had decades left to go. Here's the thing about Dave Hill that makes this story genuinely complicated. He could play, nobody disputes that. He was elite, consistently, for years. But he lit his own career on fire, over and over again, and then complained loudly about the smoke. Every single time he had a chance to step back and collect himself, he stepped forward. Every time he could have stayed quiet and let something go, he opened his mouth. And every time someone pushed him even slightly, he pushed back twice as hard and usually said something he could not take back. He kept beating himself. And that is the pattern. It ran through everything he ever did on a golf course. Now it is time to meet the 5 men who felt it most directly. We are going in reverse order. Number 5, Jack Nicklaus. This one is different from the others on this list. Dave Hill did not hate Nicklaus the way he hated some of the men below. He respected him genuinely. He admired him. He acknowledged that Nicklaus could finish a hole better than anyone else alive. And when Nicklaus publicly called Hill's swing one of the 4 best on the entire tour, Hill did not argue. He accepted it because it was earned and he knew it. But here's where it gets complicated fast. Hill could not stand what Nicklaus represented inside the PGA structure. In Hill's view, Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player were the Big 3, a protected class of golfers who operated under a completely different set of rules than everyone else. If Dave Hill had a meltdown and tossed his ball out of a bunker in frustration, he got fined, disqualified, and publicly shamed. But in his eyes, the big names never faced the same consequences when they stepped out of line. They were untouchable in ways that Hill, with all his talent, never was. And then came the 1969 Ryder Cup at Royal Birkdale. Nicklaus made his famous concession on the final hole, giving Tony Jacklin a short putt and turning what should have been a United States victory into the first tie in Ryder Cup history. The world called it a gesture of pure sportsmanship. U.S. Captain Sam Sneed was absolutely furious, and Hill agreed with Sneed completely. To Hill, Nicklaus had no authority to make that call on behalf of the entire American team. One man had unilaterally decided the outcome for everyone else. And in Hill's mind, that was precisely the kind of thing the Big Three did, because they genuinely believed they were above the rest of the players on that team. So Hill said what he always said. He let the world know exactly where he stood. And he delivered one of the most famous backhanded compliments in the history of sport. As a player, he is the greatest of all time. But as a golfer, I cannot even put him in the first 50. To Hill, being a player meant being a polished scoring machine who cared about winning titles and protecting his image. Being a golfer meant something deeper, something rawer, something earned through honesty and struggle, something that Nicklaus, comfortable behind his corporate image and protected status, had never bothered to find. Number 4. Peter Thomson. Peter Thomson won 5 Open championships. He was cerebral, measured, and completely stoic. He carried himself like a man who had decided long ago that he was above petty arguments with difficult people. That attitude, all by itself, was enough to drive Dave Hill absolutely mad. In 1971, Hill traveled to Australia to compete in several events, including the Wills Masters and the Australian Open. The two men clashed verbally at the Wills Masters, exchanging what reports described as nasty words over aspects of play and etiquette. That was just the opening act. The following week at the Australian Open, they were paired together for the opening round. The Sydney press called it the Cold War, and that is exactly what it was. The round began without a handshake on the first tee. Both men stood there and simply refused to extend even that basic courtesy. It was a deliberate statement from both sides before a single shot had been struck. They played 18 holes in near total silence. No conversation, no small talk, just the occasional murmured acknowledgement of a decent shot, and absolutely nothing more. Thomson saw Hill as a loud, uncouth American whose behavior was an embarrassment to professional golf. Hill saw Thomson as a protected establishment figure who used refined silence as a weapon and looked down on anyone who chose to speak honestly instead of elegantly. Someone who acted like the rules of decorum were beneath him while judging everyone else by them without mercy. So Hill did what Hill always did. He refused to play along. He dragged Thomson into his world, a world of open tension, public awkwardness, and newspaper headlines that had nothing to do with anyone's scorecard. The Cold War became the story of the week. Thomson had wanted to be above it all. Dave Hill made certain he could not be. Number 3. Bernard Gallacher. The 1969 Ryder Cup at Royal Birkdale is famous for Nicklaus's concession, but what happened earlier that same week between Dave Hill and a young Bernard Gallacher nearly dismantled the entire competition before it reached its famous ending. Gallacher was young, confident, and completely unafraid. He refused to be pushed around by anyone. That was always going to be a problem when Hill was involved. British captain Eric Brown had already set a hostile tone by ordering his players not to help the Americans search for lost balls in the rough. From the very first green of Hill's match, it was ugly. Gallacher's partner asked Hill to stop moving during his putting routine. Hill's partner refused to hold the flag for Gallacher. Standard courtesies vanished immediately. Then on the 7th hole, Hill missed a putt and immediately holed out without waiting his turn. Gallacher called it. Words flew. Hill's partner picked up Gallacher's ball marker and told him he could have the hole in the goddamn cup. Then Gallacher conceded a putt to Hill's partner, specifically to stop Hill from watching the ball's line. It was legal, it was clever, and Hill could not let it go. He turned to Gallacher and said it plainly. If you say one more word, I'm going to wrap this one iron around your head. The PGA of America stepped in. They told Hill directly, apologize to the British side or you are off the team entirely. Hill apologized through gritted teeth. His contempt for what he called the fussy etiquette of British golf never softened for a single day after that. Number 2. J.C. Sneed. By 1991, Dave Hill was in his mid-50s and competing on the senior PGA Tour, the Legends Circuit, the place where veterans were supposed to wind down and enjoy competing without all the chaos of the main tour. Everyone who had followed golf over the decades knew who Dave Hill was. They knew what to expect from him. He had not changed even slightly. The senior tour had not mellowed him. Time had not mellowed him. If anything, he arrived on that circuit carrying every grudge, every fine, and every frustration he had accumulated over 3 decades of playing the main tour. He was still looking for a fight. At the Transamerica Senior Golf Championship at the Silverado Resort in Napa, California, Hill was on the driving range warming up before his round. J.C. Sneed was hitting balls from the other end of the range. Sneed's shots kept rolling too close to the space where Hill was standing. In professional golf, practice range etiquette matters deeply. Hill perceived it as a deliberate sign of disrespect from a man who should have known better. He yelled at Sneed. Sneed did not stop. He yelled again. Sneed kept going, And then Dave Hill, a man in his mid-50s, grabbed a golf club and charged across the entire driving range at J.C. Sneed, who was a considerably larger man than Hill. They went at it, punching, wrestling, moving across the ground together. Caddies and fellow senior tour legends were forced to physically pull them apart. By the time the fight ended, both men were covered in mud, and everyone who witnessed it stood in complete disbelief. This was not a young hothead losing control in the heat of a final round. This was Dave Hill, decades into his career, still absolutely unable to let anything go. The driving range brawl became one of the most retold incidents in senior tour history, and it proved beyond any doubt that Hill's aggression was not something youth had driven or pressure had created. It was part of his foundation. Number 1. Chichi Rodriguez. There is no feud like this one in the history of professional golf. No animosity this sustained, this deep-rooted, or this violent in its language. And it began of all places with the two of them being roommates early in their careers. In those early days on tour, Dave Hill and Chichi Rodriguez shared a room and were simply two young professionals trying to grind their way up. But as Rodriguez blossomed into one of the most beloved entertainers the sport had ever seen, everything between them broke down completely. Rodriguez did his sword dance with the putter after sinking big putts. He chatted with galleries throughout rounds. He performed at every opportunity, and Hill despised every second of it with an intensity that only grew over time. To Hill, golf was a grim and serious technical profession that demanded absolute silence and total focus from everyone on the course. What Rodriguez was doing was not entertainment. It was psychological warfare dressed up in smiles. Hill did not see a charming performer connecting with fans. He saw a man deliberately destroying his concentration while the crowd applauded him for it. The explosion came during the final round of the 1970 Kaiser International at Silverado. Hill was in deep contention for the title. He formally protested to officials that Rodriguez was committing an excess of actions not customary in golf. The officials noted the complaint, but the back nine became a battlefield anyway. The two traded insults out on the course. Rodriguez eventually called for a tournament official and asked to be separated from Hill, saying he no longer wished to play beside a man he found abusive. Hill, furious and distracted, triple bogeyed the 11th hole and missed a playoff by a single shot. When the round ended, PGA Tour officials were so concerned about what might happen publicly that they put Hill on a golf cart and drove him away from the 18th green before a brawl could break out in front of the gallery. It did not fully prevent what followed. Reports indicate a physical confrontation still took place inside the locker room that evening. And then in 1972, Hill sat down with Sports Illustrated and said things no professional athlete had ever publicly said about a fellow competitor. He said that when Rodriguez called for the official, he should have buried my club in his head. He said that if he had followed his impulses, he would have literally whipped the intestines out of him. He said that what remained of Rodriguez would not have filled a cigar box. These were not throwaway lines. Hill meant them and kept repeating variations of them for years. Rodriguez had grown up in poverty in Puerto Rico and used entertainment as a connection to fans and a survival tool. Hill had grown up on a Michigan farm and saw golf as solemn, demanding work. Neither man was entirely wrong about the game itself, but only one of them told a national magazine he would have gutted the other. Hill never apologized for those words. He never softened them. He repeated them across interviews for years as if they were simply facts he had observed about himself. Dave Hill was his own worst enemy from the very beginning to the very end. He had the swing. He had 13 wins. He had a Vardon Trophy and the genuine respect of the greatest player who ever lived, but he burned through so much of it. The fines, the suspensions, the brawls, the $3 million antitrust lawsuit against the PGA Tour that forced the tour to build fairer and more clearly defined disciplinary procedures for every player who came after him. And Hazeltine, the course he publicly called a ruined farm, after finishing second to Tony Jacklin in the 1970 U.S. Open, the course where the Minnesota Gallery followed him around mooing and ringing cowbells for days on end while he competed, was later extensively redesigned based on the very criticisms that earned him a fine. The architect he insulted, Robert Trent Jones, became a symbol of everything Hill believed the establishment protected from honest scrutiny. He was right about far more things than people credit him for. He was almost never easy about any of it. Players today benefit from clearer rules, fairer procedures, and less arbitrary punishment, partly because Dave Hill decided to take the PGA Tour to court. But the game is different because of him. More structured, more accountable, and at least a little more honest about what goes on underneath the polished surface of professional golf. He was exactly what he always claimed to be, an honest man in a sport that sometimes preferred a beautiful lie. That, for better or worse, is a legacy that is genuinely worth remembering. If you made it all the way through this one, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us which Dave Hill moment shocked you the most. We have got plenty more stories like this one right here where this came from.
What Jack and Gary have done, and you have to win the Masters.
Big name missing from here, someone who's been associated with this tournament, Tiger Woods.
Well, obviously the main impact is that the ratings for TV shows are down. He has a great impact on the ratings. He increases the ratings.
Tom Watson said it plainly. These men had no integrity. He did not whisper it. He did not keep it behind closed doors. He said it to journalists, wrote it in open letters, and once confronted a fellow champion face to face on a dirt road in the Arizona desert. Golf is a game built on honesty. It is one of the only sports in the world where the players call their own penalties. No referee stands behind every shot. No video official watches every move. The rules trust you to police yourself. That trust is not just tradition. It is identity. It is the invisible contract between every golfer and the game they play. For decades, one man has been willing to say out loud he thinks that contract has been broken. Tom Watson has looked some of golf's most famous names in the eye, and he has told them the same thing. You had no integrity. He accused one of them of cheating in front of a rules official and a journalist. He challenged another in a published letter that shook the entire institution of professional golf to its core. He said the words publicly, clearly, and without apology. Because for Watson, the game has always been worth the discomfort. Watson is an 8-time major champion. He has won 5 Open championships. He has stood on the leaderboard in the most pressurized moments the sport can offer, and he has delivered. But beyond the trophies and the records, Watson has built something rarer and more lasting. He has become the moral conscience of professional golf, the man who says the things others are too polite to say, the man who looks at a fellow champion and tells him, in front of the whole world, that what he did was wrong 8 times. In very public ways, Watson has pointed at the biggest names in golf and declared the same verdict. They failed the game. They damaged what made it great. They showed no integrity. If this kind of deep golf story is what you came for, use the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It helps other fans find this content and it genuinely makes a difference. Now let us keep going. Those 8 names are not obscure players you have never heard of. They are legends, Hall of Famers, major winners, men with tens of millions of fans around the world. But Watson saw something in each of them that he could not leave unanswered. Something that was quietly chipping away at the very thing that makes golf different from every other professional sport. Today we go through all 8 cases, every moment, every accusation, every quote. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why Tom Watson has been called the most important moral voice in the history of modern golf, and why so many of the sport's biggest stars have felt the full force of his judgment. 8 names, 8 stories. Let us open the first case. To understand why Watson's words carry so much weight, you have to understand what makes golf different in the first place. In almost every major professional sport, there are officials whose entire job is to enforce the rules. In basketball, a referee blows a whistle. In football, a flag gets thrown. In cricket, the umpire raises a finger. But golf does not work that way. Golf is a largely self-governed sport. The expectation has always been that you know the rules and that you follow them without being told. You call your own penalties. You do not move your ball. You do not improve your lie. You do not take an advantage that was not fairly earned. The game trusts you. And that trust is not a small thing. It is the entire foundation. Bobby Jones, one of the most revered figures in golf history, once called a penalty on himself during a major championship when nobody else saw the infraction. He could have said nothing. He would have won without any consequences. But he called it. When praised for his honesty later, Jones reportedly said he might as well be praised for not robbing a bank. To him, calling that penalty was not heroism or remarkable virtue. It was simply what you were supposed to do. It was the minimum the game required. That philosophy runs through the entire culture of the sport, and it is the standard Watson was raised on. His role models were men like Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, and Jack Nicklaus, men whose records on the course were matched by their reputations away from it, men who understood that how you won mattered just as much as whether you won. Watson absorbed all of that. He did not just become a champion, he became a custodian of the values those men lived by. When Watson talks about integrity, he is actually talking about several things at once. You follow the rules exactly as written. You do not improve your lie. You do not touch growing vegetation behind your ball to gain an advantage. The letter of the rulebook is not negotiable, and it is not subject to personal interpretation on the course. The second layer is behavioral. Champion carries himself with dignity at all times. He does not throw clubs on the 16th fairway. He does not swear at the gallery. He does not conduct himself in a way that embarrasses the traditions of the game in front of a watching public. The third layer is institutional. You are loyal to the tours and organizations that gave you your career, that provided the stages on which you built your reputation. And the fourth layer, the deepest and most serious one, is moral. Where does your money come from? Who are you choosing to be in business with? What does that choice say about your values and your character? For Watson, integrity means all 4 layers simultaneously. That is a demanding standard, an exceptionally high bar, and Watson has applied it consistently across more than 4 decades in professional golf. He has not chosen silence to protect friendships, and he has not looked the other way to avoid controversy. He has spoken up every single time he believed the game was being damaged. That is the man whose judgments we are about to examine. The most recent and most dramatic chapter in this story did not happen in the 1980s. It happened in 2024. At the Masters, the most prestigious tournament in the world, Watson sat down and spoke about the state of professional golf. What he described was not triumph, it was grief. Talked about players who used to sit together at the Champions Dinner at Augusta, sharing stories, sharing laughs, sharing the rare feeling of belonging to something much greater than themselves. He said that feeling was gone. He said the togetherness had vanished. His words were quiet, but they landed hard. Because they came from a man who had actually lived that brotherhood, and then watched it slowly dissolve around him. That sense of loss had been building for years before the 2024 Masters. In June of 2023, Watson did something that surprised even the people who knew him well. He wrote an open letter directly to PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan and the Tour's policy board. It is one of the most significant documents produced about professional golf in the modern era. In it, Watson did not simply express disappointment or ask polite questions. He made a direct accusation. He said that both the players who had defected to LIV Golf and the tour leadership itself shown a lack of integrity. LIV Golf was a breakaway competition funded by the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, known as the PIF. The PGA Tour had previously argued, loudly and publicly, that taking money from that source was a moral issue. The tour pointed to the Saudi government's alleged connection to the September 11th attacks, a claim the kingdom denies, but one that remains a central concern for groups like 9/11 Families United. Watson had agreed with that moral position. He saw the players who stayed loyal to the tour as standing on the right side of a clear ethical line, and then the tour reversed course. It pursued a merger with the very organization it had spent years condemning on moral grounds. Watson called it hypocrisy. He asked how the tour could look the families of September 11th victims in the eye after everything that had been publicly stated. He questioned the transparency of the leadership, the fairness to the players who had stayed loyal, and the entire direction the institution was heading. His letter exposed a concern that went far beyond golf strategy or business decisions. It was a question about the soul of the sport. That letter was the clearest statement Watson had ever made as the game's moral guardian. It showed that his concern was not just about individual players breaking rules on a golf course in a single tournament. It was about the entire institution losing something that could not be bought back. The money flooding into the game from state-funded sources was, in Watson's view, eroding the very foundation that made professional golf worth watching and worth caring about. Now we rewind, because the 8 names Watson has challenged over the years tell the full story of how we arrived at this moment. Each one represents a different kind of failure, a different way the game's integrity was tested and, in Watson's view, found wanting. Let us go through them one by one. Number 1. Brooks Koepka. Brooks Koepka is one of the most decorated major champions of his generation. 4 major titles, a sustained period of dominance that few players in the history of the sport have managed to replicate. When LIV Golf came calling, Koepka answered. He signed with the breakaway tour funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund and walked away from the PGA Tour. For many observers, that was simply a personal business decision. For Watson, it represented something far larger than any individual contract. Watson's 2024 Masters comments focused specifically on what Koepka's departure meant for the culture of the game. He talked about the Champions Dinner at Augusta, acknowledged that private gathering of past Masters champions that takes place each year before the tournament begins. For decades, it was a sacred tradition. Champions from different eras, different countries, different generations of the sport, all sitting together in a single room, sharing meals, sharing stories. Watson loved that tradition because it was the clearest expression of the togetherness he believed was central to professional golf at its highest level. With Koepka on LIV, that dinner carried a different energy. The fracture Watson described was not administrative. It was felt in the room. Watson said it directly. "We want to get together like we were at that Champions Dinner. Right now, we don't have it." Those words were not just about seating arrangements or awkward silences. They were a statement about what was lost when men who shared that rare distinction chose the money over the fellowship. Watson's case against Koepka is rooted in the concept of stature. Argued consistently that the stature of the PGA Tour, built over generations by the greatest players in the history of the sport, worth more than any financial offer that LIV could place on the table. Koepka had the wins, the platform, standing to be a genuine leader during a pivotal moment in the game's history. Instead, Watson believes he walked away from all of that. In doing so, he contributed to a fracture that Watson feels the sport has still not recovered from. The talent was never in question, but the choices a player makes when the game needs its champions most tell their own kind of story. For Watson, Koepka had a chance to be a defining voice for the sport's future. Instead, he became a symbol of the fracture Watson had feared was coming, as a legacy that no number of major trophies can completely erase. Number 2, Dustin Johnson. If Brooks Koepka's case is about fractured fellowship, Dustin Johnson's case is about something Watson considers even more fundamental: loyalty, and the question of what kind of money you are willing to accept, and from whom. Dustin Johnson was among the very first PGA Tour stars to sign with LIV Golf. He was not a reluctant late arrival. He was an early defector, one of the players who gave the breakaway league the credibility it needed at the most critical moment of its existence. And for Watson, that timing and that decision mattered enormously. Johnson is a two-time major champion and a former world #1. He built his career, his reputation, and his entire brand within the structure of the PGA Tour. Every opportunity he had, every sponsorship he earned, every ranking point he accumulated, every dollar he made before LIV came along came from the platform the tour provided. And then, when an enormous financial offer arrived from a league funded by the Saudi Public Investment Fund, Watson accepted it without hesitation. Watson's critique of Johnson is focused squarely on loyalty and on what Watson sees as a failure to properly consider the ethical implications of that choice. He asked the question plainly: is the money really worth the loss of the stature of the PGA Tour? For Watson, that is not a rhetorical question. He genuinely believes that if you think about it seriously, if you weigh the stature of the institution against a financial figure, the answer should be obvious. The stature wins. Watson's position is also rooted in something that goes beyond loyalty to a business institution. For him, the question of where the money comes from is inseparable from the question of integrity. LIV's funding came from a source carrying serious ethical questions. Questions that the tour itself had raised loudly. Watson believed those questions did not disappear because the numbers on a contract were very large. He believed every player who accepted that money was making a statement about what they valued and who they were willing to align themselves with. Johnson made his choice. Watson made his view clear, and the gap between those two positions is exactly what Watson has been arguing about for his entire career. Some choices define a player beyond the sport itself. For Watson, taking that money from that source at that moment in history was one of them. Number 3, Bryson DeChambeau. Bryson DeChambeau arrived on the PGA Tour as something the sport had never quite seen before. A physics major, a man who approached golf like a scientist, questioning every convention, seeking every advantage through data, equipment modifications, and sheer physical transformation. For many fans, that approach was exciting. For Tom Watson, it was a source of growing unease long before DeChambeau ever signed with a rival tour. Before DeChambeau joined LIV, Watson had already been watching his interactions with the sport's governing bodies with quiet concern. DeChambeau had developed a reputation for pushing against equipment standards and challenging officials in ways that Watson felt demonstrated a lack of respect for the traditions and the governing structures of the game. The humility that Watson considers a core requirement of any true champion was not something he recognized clearly in the way DeChambeau operated. When DeChambeau eventually defected to LIV, Watson's critique became more direct and more existential. He was not simply questioning a business decision, he was questioning what the pattern of choices said about the direction of the entire game. Where is the honor? Where is the integrity? We have a problem in our game. That was Watson's statement, not aimed at one player in isolation, but triggered in significant part by watching men like DeChambeau leave the sport's traditional structure behind. DeChambeau's approach to golf, for all its technical innovation, represents something Watson views as a deeper cultural problem. It is the idea that the game is a system to be optimized and exploited rather than a tradition to be honored and passed on. You can push every boundary, argue with every official, challenge every convention, and then simply move on to the next opportunity without ever considering what you owe the sport. Watson believes that attitude is corrosive, that it models the wrong values for every junior golfer who watches from the stands. The honor Watson talks about is not about being old-fashioned or resistant to change. It is about recognizing that the game existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you leave. Your job as a professional is not just to win. It is to add to the game's dignity rather than subtract from it. Watson's view, DeChambeau's pattern of behavior, culminating in his decision to join LIV, placed him firmly on the wrong side of that ledger. Number 4, Patrick Reed. Patrick Reed stands apart from every other name on this list for one important reason. His integrity issues have nothing to do with LIV Golf, rival tours, or geopolitical funding sources. His case is about something far more basic and far more personal. The rules of the game, the ones every golfer is supposed to follow. They're supposed to follow especially when nobody else is watching. And in Reed's case, even when everybody was watching. Reed's history with rules controversies did not begin when he turned professional. There were questions before that. The most documented and most damaging incident from his professional career came at the 2019 Hero World Challenge in the Bahamas. Reed was filmed by a television camera in the act of improving his lie in a waste area. He smoothed the sand behind his ball with his hand on 2 separate practice swings, which is a direct violation of the rules of golf. He was penalized 2 strokes. He disputed it, and the golf world watched with wide eyes. For Watson, Reed represents the most fundamental kind of integrity failure the game can produce. There is no complicated layer of geopolitics here, no debate about institutional loyalty or the source of a tour's funding. Just the simplest question in the sport. Do you follow the rules when the cameras are pointing at you? In Reed's case, even that basic standard was not met. Watson has been entirely direct about this standard. The rules are what they are. You have to be honest with yourself and the game. That sentence is short. It is simple, but it contains everything Watson believes about the spirit of golf. You do not need an official monitoring your every move. You do not need a camera crew present. You are supposed to know the rules and apply them to yourself, accurately and honestly, in every single situation the game puts in front of you. The phrase honest with yourself is the most revealing part. Watson is not just talking about external enforcement, talking about internal character. A player who repeatedly finds themselves at the center of rules controversies is not just encountering bad luck. In Watson's view, they are failing the most personal test the game presents. Test of the internal moral compass, the ability to recognize what is right even when doing it costs you something. That is the standard that has defined the greatest figures in golf history. And by that standard, Patrick Reed has repeatedly come up short. Watson's point is not that Reed is uniquely terrible as a person. It is that in a sport built entirely on self-governance, a pattern of rules controversies is a pattern of character. And patterns do not lie. Number 5. Sergio Garcia. Sergio Garcia has been one of European golf's most celebrated figures for the better part of 3 decades. Ryder Cup icon, a player of breathtaking natural skill who finally captured the 2017 Masters and proved he had the talent to win the game's most important titles. Watson's view of Garcia is shaped not just by what Garcia achieved, but by how he chose to carry himself along the way. The friction between Watson and Garcia goes back to the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles, where Watson served as the United States captain. That was a difficult week. The Americans lost to Europe in a match that exposed tensions within the U.S. team. Garcia, as one of Europe's most combative and passionate players, at the center of the competition's most charged moments. Watson's criticism of Garcia's conduct was rooted in what he saw as a consistent pattern of volatility. A player who could be brilliant and captivating one moment and petulant and undisciplined the next, who wore his frustrations in ways that Watson felt were unbecoming of a player representing the game at the very highest level. The idea Watson keeps returning to when discussing Garcia is the concept of the golfer as a representative. When you pull on a national uniform at the Ryder Cup, you are not playing for yourself alone. You are representing the sport, your country, and the deep traditions of the competition. Watson believed Garcia's public outbursts and his emotional inconsistency a failure to honor that responsibility properly. You owe the jersey more than that. You owe the game more than that. When Garcia eventually joined LIV Golf, Watson viewed it as the natural conclusion of a career that had consistently placed personal interests and personal emotions above the stature of the sport. Watson's words on Garcia captured his entire philosophy in one clean line. It's about the stature of the game, showing humility when you represent it. Garcia had been given every platform professional golf could offer. He had been celebrated and loved for decades. And in the end, Watson believes he chose personal gain over the institution that made him who he was. Garcia's case is a reminder that Watson's standard does not only apply to rules violations or financial choices. It applies to temperament, to how a player carries himself in difficult moments, to whether he can set aside personal frustration in the service of something bigger. By that measure, Watson found Garcia consistently wanting. Number 6, Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson is the most layered and complex case on this entire list. His relationship with Tom Watson has multiple distinct chapters, and each chapter adds another dimension to the question of what integrity truly means in professional golf. The first chapter begins at the 2014 Ryder Cup at Gleneagles. Watson was the American captain. The team lost to Europe in a result that was painful for everyone in the United States camp. And at the post-match press conference, Mickelson did something that many in golf considered a serious breach of the unwritten code the sport lives by. He stood up and publicly criticized Watson's captaincy in front of the assembled media. He aired grievances in public that almost every tradition in golf holds should be handled privately. You talk to the captain behind closed doors. You express your concerns quietly through the appropriate channels. You do not publicly undermine the man who led you by going on record at a press conference. For Watson, that was a direct violation of the loyalty code he had always believed should govern the relationship between a player and his captain. It was a public act of disloyalty, and Watson did not forget it. But the second chapter is larger and more serious. Mickelson did not merely defect to LIV Golf as one player among many. According to the research behind Watson's 2023 letter, Mickelson was the primary architect of the defection. He was the most recognizable and most influential player who helped give the breakaway league the credibility it needed during its critical early period. And that role, combined with all the moral questions surrounding LIV's funding source, placed Mickelson at the very center of Watson's most serious criticisms. Watson's 2023 open letter and his comments at the 2024 Masters were widely understood to be directed significantly at Mickelson's choices. Watson framed the failure in terms of the moral issue. The PGA Tour had argued for years that taking money from the Saudi Public Investment Fund was ethically unacceptable. Mickelson knew that argument. He had heard it stated publicly and repeatedly by tour leadership, and then he set it aside completely and took the money anyway. Watson put the contradiction plainly. I understand the cries of hypocrisy. Disregarding the moral issue is a position which, for a long time, was publicly highlighted by tour leadership. Mickelson did not act out of ignorance. He chose to discard a moral position he was fully aware of. That is a specific and deliberate kind of integrity failure. For Watson, who has spent his entire career insisting that the game demands more from its champions than talent and victories, it is one of the most deeply disappointing failures of all. Number 7. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods is the most famous golfer in the history of the sport. His dominance redefined what was thought possible in professional golf. And Tom Watson's critique of him is not about a rules violation on a specific hole or a contract signed with a rival tour. It is about something Watson considers equally important to all of those things. Responsibility that comes with being the most influential player the game has ever seen. By 2010, Woods was preparing to return to professional golf after a period of personal scandal that had consumed the sport's headlines for months. Watson chose not to make the personal scandal the focus of his critique. Instead, he focused on something more specific to the game itself. He focused on what he saw as a failure of stature in the way Woods had been conducting himself on the golf course. Watson's critique came during an interview in Dubai. He pointed to Woods' use of profanity on the course and his tendency to throw clubs when shots did not go the way he intended. To many casual observers, those were minor frustrations that any competitor might display in the heat of battle. To Watson, they were symptoms of a deeper problem, a failure to carry the full responsibility that came with being the most watched, most followed, most influential player in the history of the sport. Watson's argument rests on a clear and consistent principle. When you are the best player in the world, every junior golfer is watching how you behave. Every new fan forms their first impression of the sport based on how you carry yourself. Every television camera in the world is pointed at you. Your conduct does not represent just yourself. It represents every player who came before you and every player who will come after. Responsibility comes with the position, whether you want it or not. Did not accept that a player carrying the stature Woods had accumulated could behave in ways that Byron Nelson, Ben Hogan, or Jack Nicklaus would not have recognized as befitting a champion. Said it directly, Tiger has to take ownership. He needs to clean up his act and show the respect for the game that other people before him have shown. Watson also suggested that Woods' public return should not come through a tournament, but a genuine and transparent conversation. He admitted his failures and committed to a different standard going forward. Ability and ownership were not optional for a player in Woods' position. Watson believed they were required. This critique marked a clear shift in how Watson was understood publicly. Before this moment, he had been known primarily as a technical enforcer of the rules. The Gary player confrontation had defined him in that role. But with Tiger, he became something else as well. He became an arbiter of character, of the way a champion must carry himself in the most watched moments of his sport. That distinction matters, because it tells you that the standard Watson applies is not only found in the rulebook, it is found in the soul of the game. Number 8, Gary player. Now we arrive at the case that started it all. The confrontation that first showed the world exactly who Tom Watson was and exactly what he was willing to risk to protect the integrity of the game he loved. The year was 1983. The event was the inaugural Skins game in the Arizona desert at Desert Highlands Golf Club. This was not an ordinary exhibition. It was one of the highest paying events in golf at the time. The total purse was $360,000. Understand what that number meant. Consider this. The Masters champion that same year earned $90,000 for winning one of the most prestigious titles in all of sport. The Skins game was offering 4 times that amount in a short exhibition event. The 4 players competing were the biggest names of the era: Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Tom Watson. And the pressure to perform for that kind of money was real. The critical moment came at the 16th hole, a 240-yard par 3 where $120,000 in accumulated skins were sitting on the line. An enormous sum by any measure. Gary Player was preparing to play his second shot from the right side of the green when Watson observed an action that made him stop cold. Player reached down and removed a leaf from behind his ball. Player described it as a loose impediment, which is a category of material that the rules of golf permit you to remove. But Watson did not see a loose impediment, saw a rooted leaf, growing weed. And under the rules of golf, you cannot remove anything that is fixed or growing in order to improve your lie or your line of play. That is one of the clearest rules the game has. Watson did not confront Player in the middle of the hole. He waited. He gathered himself. He was certain about what he had seen, and he was not going to act impulsively. After the round on a dirt road behind the 18th green, rules official Joe Day present and journalist Dave Anderson within earshot, Watson turned to Gary Player and delivered one of the most famous confrontations in golf history. "I'm accusing you, Gary. You can't do that. I'm tired of this. I wasn't watching you, but I saw it." Every word in that statement is deliberate. Accusing you is not a suggestion or a polite question. It is a direct, formal charge. "Tired of this" tells you everything about Watson's state of mind. He was not reacting to an isolated moment. He viewed this as part of a longer pattern of behavior he had been watching for years. And "I wasn't watching you, but I saw it" is perhaps the most extraordinary line of all. Watson was not conducting surveillance. He was not trying to catch anyone out. He simply happened to see what he saw, and he was not going to pretend otherwise, no matter how famous or respected the man in front of him was. Player called the accusation staggering. In his later writings, he described being accused of cheating as the most heinous charge you can lay against a golfer. He maintained that the leaf was loose and that he had followed the rules. No formal ruling was made against him. But Watson did not retract a single word. Yeah, he believed what he saw, he said it out loud, and he accepted every consequence that followed, including the awkwardness, the controversy, and the damage to a relationship that had existed for years. The money tells its own story, too. Player finished that event as the largest earner, taking home $170,000. Watson earned $10,000. He lost the financial battle completely. He walked away having said the truth as he saw it, one of the most celebrated golfers in the world in the most direct and unambiguous terms possible. No politics, no softening, no second thoughts. And for Watson, that was not a small thing. That was everything the game had ever asked him to be. Golf is one of the most enduring sports in the world. It has survived a great deal over the past century. Economic downturns, all with the passing of generations, the rise of enormous commercial forces. Every era has brought its own test to the game's integrity and its traditions. Every era has also produced people willing to stand up and say, "This is where the line is. This is what the game is worth." Tom Watson has been one of those people for more than 4 decades. He has given the sport cannot be measured in prize money or trophy counts. He has provided something far rarer, a consistent, principled, and fearless voice that says the game matters more than any individual player, any single contract, and any financial offer on the table. He has called out the greatest golfer who ever lived. He has faced a legend down on a dirt road in the desert. He has written an open letter that challenged the integrity of an entire institution. He has done all of it because he genuinely believes that what golf stands for is worth the discomfort of saying uncomfortable things. The standard Watson has established, what has come to be understood as the Watsonian standard, asks 4 things of every professional golfer. Follow the rules without exception. Carry yourself with dignity in every public moment. Stay loyal to the institutions that built your career. And be honest about the moral weight of the choices you make. That is a high bar. Very few players can clear it perfectly. Watson has never claimed the standard is easy. He has only ever said it is necessary. Golf is at a crossroads right now. The money in the game has never been larger. The commercial forces reshaping the sport are more powerful than anything past generations ever had to face. The fractures Watson described at the 2024 Masters are real and they are visible. They are felt in rooms that used to feel like sanctuaries of brotherhood. But the game has survived everything that has been thrown at it so far. It survived what happened on that dirt road in 1983. It survived the storm of 2010. It is navigating the LIV era. And at every difficult moment, the voices that mattered most were the ones brave enough to say what was right even when saying it was hard. Watson's hope, and the hope of every fan who cares about this game at its deepest level, the next generation of champions understand what is truly at stake. That winning alone is not the whole answer. Stature matters. That the way you win, the company you keep, the choices you are willing to live with publicly, and the things you are willing to protect say as much about you as any trophy you ever lift. The game gave Tom Watson everything he ever asked of it. In return, he gave the game this: a standard, a benchmark, a challenge to every player who follows. Names on his list will be debated for years, the arguments will continue. But the standard itself, the insistence that the game demands more than talent, more than trophies, more than contracts, that standard is not going anywhere. The question he leaves behind has never been complicated. It is the same question it has always been in golf. Can you meet that?